Hello, friend. Glad to see you. Um, we're just going to give people a couple minutes of grace as they jump from what they were doing. And while we're doing that, folks are invited to put in the chat where you're calling in from today, what center you might be representing. Um, if you know the Indigenous territory you're on, that would be cool. If not, it's a great opportunity to look it up and learn. Um, and we're going to get started here about 2 minutes past the time. So we just have a few folks coming in, which is great. Welcome, welcome, folks. Alexander, Pam, welcome. Glad you're here. We're just putting in the chat where we're from and what retreat center we're connected to and the Indigenous territory we might be on if we know that. Francisco, hello, welcome. So glad you're here. And jumping in. Welcome, Anne. Glad you're here. Folks are just putting their name and where they're from and the Indigenous territory they find themselves on into the chat. You're invited to do so if you're able. Just giving people a minute here. We're going to get going in a second. Lon from Gilchrist. I don't know if we've ever had the chance to meet. Glad you're here.
We've not. No, it's my first opportunity on the uh, on the call.
Great. Well, welcome. I think I've had a chance, although Anne, I'm not sure. Have we connected before?
Don't think so. I'm Francesca's assistant, so I've talked to you over email, but not on Zoom.
Okay. Well, we're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. I'm glad, and to all of you who have been here before, really glad you're here again. So good to see all the friends here. So we're going to get started, and we're recording this call. So just to let folks know that everything you say will be recorded and posted later. So that's just a helpful piece of information to folks to know as you're sharing. Other than the breakout rooms, we don't record the breakout rooms. So that's just a helpful piece. And I'm just so grateful that Pam, who is with RCC, is also here today. And Pam will be helping out with some tech stuff in the background. I always appreciate Pam. Um, and thank you to you for making time to be here together today to talk about, you know, regional groups, peer support groups. This is really a true roundtable opportunity. There's no slide presentation. I have some things planned out. I'm facilitating this call. There's no special guest speaker. You're stuck with just me today. And this will be a chance to connect and to learn and to offer mutual support as we evolve and grow into our future. So today is more about like the relationships between us rather than structure. It's more about listening rather than deciding. So we're not going to make any decisions. And we're here to share what has worked. And some of you have been a part of regional groups perhaps in the past, and maybe you haven't at all, and that's okay. We're going to talk about what might be missing. We're going to talk about what we might imagine together as RCC continues to grow and to change. So let's just take an opportunity to ground ourselves here. And I just invite you to take your hands off your keyboard for a minute, to find your feet on the floor, put down that pen or your lunch or whatever you're doing. And let's just take a few breaths in together. And just allow everything that's happened in our day to be present with us, but not taking us over. Let us set aside all of that so that we can be present to one another and to this conversation. We trust that the energy from the earth, from this circle, will sustain us into the rest of this day and into this conversation. Help us to listen and to be open and to share. And we just take an opportunity to open our eyes and look around the circle at all these beautiful human bodies that have made their way, all of us unique and weird and wonderful here together. It's good. It is good to be together. So I thought I would just start our time by sharing kind of historically and what our purpose has been. So in terms of regional groups, and I know Leslie probably has been a part of a regional group quite a lot. And so, Leslie, feel free to pipe in. Anybody can pipe in at any time. Welcome, Sarah Lynn. So glad you're here. But historically, RCC has supported connection in a few key ways. And one of them is through geographical or what we've called regional groups, but not always necessarily geographical, which has brought together centers that are physically closer aligned. And a great example of that is the Midwest Regional Group, which did recently meet, but most of these regional groups haven't met or have tried to meet in the last over a year or so. And there have also been peer or affinity groups, which are more about connecting people around shared roles or interests or practices. So a great example of that would be like the Catholic affinity group that tried to start, which would be supporting centers that have a Catholic lineage or history. And I know that these spaces have been meaningful for many. The Midwest group actually had an in-person retreat a few years ago, and I know that that was really important to that group. And at the same time, we know that participation and energy has varied, depending on how much support RCC has been able to offer. Aaron and Ben were able to offer more support in terms of staffing capacity with the amount of hours they had compared to the amount of hours that are currently, and or who are the folks sort of on the ground that have had the energy to sort of like volunteer and give that time in. So the purpose of today's conversation isn't to decide on the next model, but to reflect on what has been life-giving, to name what we think is needed now, and to explore possible next steps and for connection and for peer support, and to gather wisdom today to help what we might design next. So hopefully that makes sense. Welcome, Karen. So glad you're here. We're just kind of reviewing a little bit about the history of peer support groups and regional groups, and talking a little bit about that. So before we imagine forward, I think it's important to acknowledge, what these spaces what they've offered. So here's some things that I know that they've offered. They've helped to build, regional groups have helped to build trust through proximity. So these groups have been able to build trust with one another. And I think this has been a key tenet of the RCC since I've been a part of it, is to sort of dismantle this idea of competition between centers and to really foster this idea that collaboratively, when we work together, we actually build a stronger, retreat world and a stronger society for mutual flourishing and for the inner and outer work that we all do. These regional groups have fostered this collaboration and shared problem solving. So I'll share, like, for instance, in Southern Ontario, there wasn't a formal regional group, but many of the centers did direct retreats to another center when they were full, or borrow, a kitchen, have catering done if they needed that. So that kind of like really tangible, like on the ground, day-to-day things that need to happen. I also think that these regional groups have helped to, especially during the pandemic years, reduce isolation. This work can really feel lonely. You feel, and being the leader of a retreat center is a very weird job. It's not like anybody else's job. You have to know how to manage finances. You have to be able to fundraise. You have to understand managing a kitchen and housekeeping. You have to understand groundskeeping, and you have to do that all while eating your food at the same time. So it's like we all get that. It's this intensely beautiful, weird role that we find ourselves in. The peer and interest-based spaces have offered deep resonance around shared roles or challenges. So I think that's been particularly true, for instance, in the example I used around Catholic retreat centers, which they're kind of facing a moment together of decreased funding available to Catholic centers. And what does that look like, growing into the future? There's been opportunities for practical learning from people who are walking on the same road. Um, there's been emotional and spiritual support that comes from this kind of work that is often misunderstood. So, this opportunity to really be with people who know the work. So, both of these groups, peer groups and regional groups, have mattered, and both raise questions about sustainability and relevance going forward. So, with all of that grounding, and is there anything anybody else would want to add from their experience of regional or peer or affinity groups that would kind of be about honoring sort of where we've come from? How many folks, just like maybe a raise hand, were a part of a affinity, a peer, or a regional group? So Leslie and Pam and Karen and myself. Leslie, I saw you unmute. Did you want to share something?
So I think you hit all the high points for me, particularly joining RCC came at a time when I was new in the role. And so it helped me to accelerate my learning curve in a way that it otherwise would have taken me years. Um, and built relationships because there isn't anyone across town doing the work that I'm doing. I've also wanted the opportunity to learn more from each other. And I think that's still an area of growth. Um, we all have really unique business models, and yet, just evidenced by the kinds of informational webinars you've put together, there are still many intersections of shared interest and practice.
Thanks, Leslie. Francisco?
Thank you, Michael. I I also was in a affinity group when I jumped into the ED position at my retreat center, and that was very key to me. I found within the affinity group, despite that this was not necessarily religious-based affiliation or geographic-based affiliation, but a affinity group that was thematic-based, and I had the opportunity to learn from my peers and to navigate key questions that was or that were very important to me as I was jumping into my role, and at the same time had the opportunity to expand my network, and until today I still benefit from those early encounters.
Thanks, Francisco. And I would echo a lot of what Leslie and Francisco just shared. When I was an executive director, a very similar experience. And so the next step I want to just take us on is maybe looking just a little forward, and how we might expand how we think of connection. So we've had a few examples there. And I just want to cue you. I'm going to kind of give some of my thoughts as network manager. So part of my role as network manager is I sort of think of it as like tending the soil of the network. So what helps us all flourish and grow in a good way? And what are the things we need to do? And how can I help build that healthy soil so that these pieces can grow a good foundation? And as soon as I'm finished that, we're going to do a little journaling exercise. So you might want to just find your pencil and a notepad or a paper just for that as I ramble on here for another minute or two. So a question I've asked myself is, what if RCC's future connection spaces were shaped less by geography, not necessarily, it could still be that, but less by geography and more about shared contexts, role, or lived experiences? So this could include more interest or identity-based groups. So, regional groups that based in identity, such as Catholic retreat centers as an example was an affinity or peer support group. It could be Buddhist, for instance, or interfaith or yoga. So kind of like if there's a spiritual grounding, that could be a way that we're rooted. There was a conversation about maybe there should be a Canadian interest group that would allow for Canadian conversation and retreat to happen. Or it could be more like state or regional based groups, such as the Midwest Support Group, where geography is truly what holds it. And it could include peer support circles that are focused on shared roles or leadership seasons. So Alexander and I actually had this conversation just a few days ago around what would it look like for there to be a peer support group for first-time executive directors, people that are in year 1 to 3, where they could get together once a month. Or for folks who are starting a new retreat center. I was on a call the other day with 3 folks that are in the year 1 to 5 of purchasing land and clearing the land and making space and figuring out what their mission is. Or perhaps we could have a peer support group more around operations or hospitality or programming. So I know there's some folks here who support the work from an administrative perspective. What would it look like for those folks to have an opportunity? Or maybe around the idea of centers that are in transition or in a rebuilding phase. Maybe you've historically been alive for 70 years, you've hit a big speed bump, and you have to sort of like recalibrate the entire model. What would that look like to have a peer support group in that? So Five Oaks went through that, 10 years ago. That was a great example. Maybe you're in a financial or a fundraising role at your center and you would benefit from a peer support circle. So these are kind of some percolating ideas I'm having around how we support one another. And I think that I wonder if these circles could function as spaces of mutual support, as they have, spaces to learn together as a community, places where shared wisdom and resources are offered. So how great would it be if our hospitality teams got to meet and learn about like housekeeping schedules and menu planning and the pieces that honestly if you're in the executive director role, probably don't know that much about, so how could we really make that possible? And what I'm really loving seeing in these community calls is folks sort of in the lead role encouraging other folks in their centers to participate in these calls. I think that's the organic growth that we really want to see. And circles where people can be vulnerable with one another and where they can feel supported through strong facilitation. So I just want to reemphasize that this conversation isn't about replacing one model with another, but I think it's about expanding our imagination for how care and connection might be structured across the network. So this is where I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of reflection, which is going to lead us into small group sharing and then to a larger group sharing into the more roundtable part of the conversation. And I have 4 journaling questions. So this next piece is going to take 8 to 10 minutes. And I just really hope you can really sink into, from your perspective in your role for however long you've served, how might this resonate with you going forward? So the first question, I'm just going to give you about 90 seconds or so to respond to this. Just write down your thoughts. Where have you felt the strongest sense of connection in RCC? So that could be regional or peer-based or elsewhere. And if you haven't had a connection, this could be a chance to just dream about what that might look like for you to deepen your connection. So just take a few seconds to jot some ideas down. The next question I'll offer, and if you're still writing, it's okay, just try to digest this next question as we go. Do shared roles or identities feel more or less sustaining than geography based at this time or vice versa? Where do you think the energy is moving?
Could you repeat that, Michael?
No problem. Does the idea of shared roles or identities feel more strong to you than geography right now, geographically based groups, or vice versa? Where do you think the energy is? Question three is what kinds of peer support would be most helpful for you and your center at this stage? So you could think about that from your position. You could also think about other people who serve in your center and what might be helpful for them. And I'm just going to get some more water while you write. And Pam, just as we get ready to offer the fourth question, I just want to cue you up that in a minute we're going to be moving into breakout rooms, rooms of three. And the fourth question is, what would make your participation in these kind of groups feel possible? What would make it doable? How much time could you give or would you give? What would make it meaningful? What would make it life-giving? Okay. Has everybody written their hearts out? So we're just going to hold that. Just that was a moment for you individually to kind of think it through a little bit. You can bring some of those threads into your um, room. I'm just going to put the question that I really like you to talk about in the chat, and I'll also post it to the private chat to each group. But there's two questions. So the first, and you're going to have 10 minutes in your room. So lots of spaciousness, about 3.5 minutes per person to really share and to listen to one another. Where do you most need connection and support right now in your role or context? And what kind of group would best meet that need? So make sure everybody has a chance to answer that question. And if you're fast talkers like I am and you need a second question, I've put a second question in there. This is never a problem with RCC, but anyways, thinking about RCC's future, what kind of peer or interest-based group would you most likely participate in? And I'm going to add or encourage another teammate and why. So we're going to send folks into rooms for 10 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll have time to share. So you may want to appoint someone to share on behalf of your group, but there's a small number of us, so we should be able to share with others. So see you in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that was a good 10 minutes. If you're like me, at the 10 minutes feels like 52 seconds, and you're like, how did that go by so fast? There's so much more that I want to say. And so this is going to be the truest sense of the roundtable for this next 10 or so, 15 minutes. So I wonder if we could just call on folks to share some thoughts and some wisdom that came up out of your journaling time and out of the breakout rooms. It doesn't have to just be one thought, but let's try to give everybody a chance to sort of give a shout out. Maybe would like to start us off on a theme that has emerged.
Well, I'll
Well, I
begin.
was, oh, go ahead.
I think in our group, people were very more interested in the peer support. So, like if the programming directors all got together, or the marketing directors all got together, or more operations. Although one person wondered, would those on the ground have the time to get on the Zoom call to chat with each other, right? But certainly. Some of us felt like having the whole team, not just the executive directors involved, but having the whole team involved in a peer-to-peer support. For me, I enjoyed, I think I told you I was part of HCN before, and so a couple of centers that were ashrams or Buddhist centers got together, and we're still meeting, and we formed in 2019. So that's been very, very helpful for us. So I just wanted to put that out there. And then another thing was, interest in programming, land-based programming and youth programming. Um, you know, um, because of the way the world is right now. And let me see, was there anything else? And Matthew and Anne, please jump in if I missed anything. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. Oh, transition planning and funding. Funding, land-based programming, new programming, and transition planning.
So I'm hearing a theme of like role-based peer support groups, but
Yep.
also programmatic-based peer support groups. So folks that are doing specifically land-based programming or youth-focused programming. So those are two kind of interesting circles. Thanks for sharing that, Karen, and on behalf of your group.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think Pam, were you trying to jump in at the same time there?
Willing to, sure.
Thanks.
I was with Sarah Lynn and Francisco. Always lovely to hang out with those guys. And it's interesting that we thought that there was real value to each kind of group, but for different reasons and maybe not necessarily the same level of frequency. So I know that like we've reached out to Sarah Lynn many, many times. We're a Buddhist retreat center, but there were a lot of practical things, especially like with dealing with the weather and things that are more regionally based. And when certain things happen, there's a hurricane or a flood or massive snowstorm or something like that, it's really good to know your neighbors, right? It's really good to know who to turn to, how are you dealing with this, and maybe supporting each other, whether it's moral support or practical support. It's good to know your neighbors. But maybe we don't need to be meeting all the time. Maybe a quarterly kind of thing is fine, a touch base thing, just to know your neighbors. And so that's different than the ongoing, really relationship building stuff that goes with a peer support group that is around, first time executive directors or executive directors in general or program people. Each of these groups really have value. And then personally, I'm new to the Buddhist space. So I really want to be with other organizations that are running Buddhist retreat centers, right? That's not um, I find myself in that position where I don't have that expertise and I need to hire new staff and I don't always know what to look for and I need to make sure that we're preserving mission. So, yeah, I think there's value for each of those areas. Did I miss anything, Francisco and Sarah Lynn? Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. So yeah, just to recap, what I heard you say is, that perhaps regional groups don't need to meet as often, and that there could be these emergent calls when there's a crisis, for instance. So for instance, on March 4th, we're having a sort of like state of Turtle Island call politically, like what is our retreat response? This is sort of an emergent, it's not a regional thing, but it's all of us in it together. Same with COVID, but a hurricane or something like that. And then these relational groups, so I know there's at least two Buddhist calls on this, two Buddhist centers in this call right
Yeah.
now. So Yeah, thank you
There
for
was
the examples.
there was one more thing. I'm sorry. Because my first response was I wanted to be with other Buddhist centers, and then I was realizing I actually learn more when we have a diversity of voices, right? Because like I know we've turned to the guest house many times in learning from their business model. Even though we're a Buddhist center, we've got to pay the mortgage and we've got to pay landscaping and that sort of thing. So they when you have groups that are too much alike, you limit yourself on the ideas.
Mhm. So just to play off that then, Pam, like, do you feel like you get that diversity flavor from like the community calls and from the roundtables? Or
Yeah, I
and
do. And the where I've personally had the most connection with RCC is when someone says something that I find particularly interesting or that resonates with me. I reach out to them in the chat. We
yeah.
follow up and have more conversation, and often bring other people into the conversation and they have these, oh, excuse me, kind of organic, impromptu groups
Hmm.
that just run their course.
Yeah. So you might
And
meet for like 2 or 3 times with that group. It's around a very
yeah,
simple thing and you get kind of get what you need. Yeah, I
and then
love
move
that,
on.
that opportunity for that organic connection to happen, especially when I'm talking to folks that are brand new to RCC as a member, I say like this is one of the best parts is you can go onto
That's
Facebook, you
right.
can reach out to Karen and say like, "Hey, tell me about this." And everybody's always supportive or sharing documents or resources. So,
Exactly.
okay, because that's helpful for me to clarify like how do others feel? Like, are you getting that sort of diverse experience from community calls and from the roundtables, or, you know, Alexander?
Yeah, no, as the more that I reflect on these questions, the harder it is to not land on like yes to all of the above, you know? Like because when we started this conversation, I was listening to you ask the question. I definitely felt more drawn to or interested in role or affinity based gatherings just from where I stand in the questions that I'm asking. So you mentioned our conversation about, oh, it would be really useful for folks who are stepping into a new kind of leadership role, being an executive director and running retreat centers. Like the coincidence of those two things are, particularly for folks who haven't been in that kind of executive leadership role before. It's a different kind of, I've been a program director. It's very different to be looking at and responsible for, as you mentioned, all the kind of quirky, funny things that retreat center directors are responsible for overseeing. So I definitely find personally like that's interesting and useful for me. And then you and I had also had a conversation, and you brought this up too, about seasonality. What are the specific, challenges and opportunities of seasonal retreat centers, and how are people navigating the limitations of a shorter season, or even if you are year round, but your sort of cadence picks up in particular times of the year. How do you navigate those ebbs and flows? Like, how do you plan for it? How do you integrate that into your financial models? Like, there's some practical questions, but also and also some kind of emotionally kind of charged questions that come up around that, at least for me. But then when I heard you talking about the role that these regional groups had played, that it raised some very clear opportunity, things that, for instance, I'm looking out my window right now. We finally had some snowfall here in Colorado. It's been a historically low, snow year, and in 2020 we had to figure out how to navigate not just a pandemic year, but also the East Troublesome Fire, which was a huge, almost 200,000 acre burn here in the Rocky Mountains. So wildfire mitigation and specifically thinking about it through the lens of indigenous stewardship practices, like, and how do we connect with, there are those sorts of practical questions and connect, which isn't necessarily limited to Colorado, right? Like Canada, you deal with the same thing depending on where you are in the region. California, obviously, but and then what you're naming too about knowing your neighbors and also and being able to support each other. Like, okay, someone comes to us, we don't have the availability they're looking for, but we can recommend that you look at this other group if this is the environment that you want to be in. So all of those things felt really resonant for me, and I definitely agree that I've gotten a lot from hearing about other organizations that aren't necessarily on paper similar to Shadowcliff, but there's some sort of something that is resonant. And I do think that I get those from the roundtables and community calls. I've just been over the course of the past 4 months, so grateful for this community and this organ and and retreat center collaboration as an organization, because I'm just sponging up everything, because all of this is new to me, and trying to model, the timepiece is real, and I also just have a dispositional belief that it is valuable to put this time in, to show up to these calls, to build community with all of you. And I'm trying to model that for my staff and invite them to things that I think are relevant to their roles, and also just say, sign up for this newsletter. And if there are things that I don't invite you to, but that feel interesting or relevant to you, you just go ahead and sign up as part of your this, like, consider it part of your professional development. You're going to bring stuff back from those conversations that I just have again a faith and a belief that's going to be useful, to you, to our staff as individuals and their growth and development, which is something that's important to me as a retreat center leader, is thinking about our staff as part of that ecology of
Mhm.
like, they are also retreatants, you know. Um,
Thanks, Alexander.
yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, I've talked a lot.
No, it's okay. Hey, it's a roundtable. We're supposed to talk. And I know you were in the third group. Is there any threads that I think you were with Lon? Is there any threads that the two of you wanted to share that kind of grew out of that conversation?
Well, I mean, Lon and I had it was hard. There were only two of us, and it still felt hard to get through everything in 10 minutes. Um, but yeah, I mean, asked some really useful questions. Uh, Lon, your kind of positionality is less as a representative of a retreat center, but as someone who participates in and also has this background in nonprofit leadership, and now does sort of organizational consulting and development work, and believes in the power of retreat.
Hmm.
So it almost felt like a nice little, like, coaching session almost for me. Yeah. I don't know if you want to share any more, Lon, about what emerged
No,
in that.
I care more about what you're saying than what I would ever say. It's just so important. I mean, I'm just tickled to be here and to listen and observe people who care so deeply about the gift that you're giving to the world, and how to do that really, really well. It's just a joy to be here. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Well, now I want to have a coaching session with you, Lon. Maybe Pam, could you do me a favor and throw my email into the chat while I keep talking here? So if folks want to, but I'd love to, anybody on this call who I haven't connected with one-on-one, I would love the opportunity to do that and to talk more about what you're hoping for. That's how, like, all these community call and roundtable ideas come out. Like the one that's coming up in May around the seasonality of retreat center. That's because Alexander and I had a conversation. So, they grow out of these, and great people who are consultants are supporting sort of this work along the way. So, Lon, there might be something that we could collaborate on as well. Um, so I guess what I'm hearing, and I'm just test this with the group, but I'm hearing that RCC should continue to do it all, and to try to do it all. I guess for me, it's like I'll just name, like, right now that's not, like, financially possible. So I guess what I would reach out to you, like, what do you think is the most important place to start? Like, should we invest our time in regional groups? Should we invest them in the sort of peer affinity groups? You can either unmute and talk or throw your thoughts into the chat. Both are important and helpful. But if we had to invest, where should it be? Like, we will invest. Where do you think it should be?
Personally, I
Well,
think, oh, sorry, Matthew, you
no,
haven't had
go
a
ahead,
chance to
Pam.
talk yet. I think there's a lot of energy around the peer support groups, but I also think that this group is perfectly capable and needs to be encouraged to utilize the format like the Facebook group. I know that I've seen affinity groups just pop up when someone says, I have a question around this. Can we start a group? And then they meet once and they say, hey, this is great. Can we keep doing this every month? And they rotate who takes the lead of setting up the Zoom call. And it just kind of happens organically. It's up on Facebook. Anyone who wants to join can join. So I don't think it all falls to RCC. We're all like grown-ups capable of networking. So it just for it to be encouraged and for there to be kind of like a culture around that
Mhm.
is great. But maybe RCC picks where there's the most energy to invest its, energies, its resources, and lets the rest of the group just kind of take responsibility for setting up their own groups.
Hmm. Yeah, so RCC could sort of be the impetus of something
Yeah,
starting and maybe go to the first 2 to 3 calls and then trust that the group is going to sort of like roll out in a lifespan that seems good to that group. And one of my wondering is like, how do we track that like on the website, for instance, so folks
mm.
would know like, oh, there is already a Buddhist group. Is there's like a primary, like I can email Pam, like could the groups just sort of self-identify or email RCC Pam to get connected so I'm just curious to see. But Matthew,
There's
what
a
were
few
your
too many
thoughts?
Pams on the call right now, so
You can never
it's
have too many
confusing.
Pams. The more Pams,
There
the
can
better.
never be too many Pams on the call.
Exactly.
I don't know. It just encouraging people to check out the Facebook page in addition to the website
Yeah.
is just one thing. I don't think it's the answer. I think it's just a possibility.
Yeah.
Okay,
Matthew, what were
that's it
your
for me.
thoughts?
I agree with the overarching concept. So, in the first place, I agree that all of it is beneficial and worthwhile. And if it comes down to a point of resources where it's just not possible to do all of it, I tend to lean toward focusing on like the executive director level, on the higher level, as RCC, and then having some of those coaching sessions, some of the sessions be specifically on how to set up more regionalized additional offshoots. And so then you would have some easy direction for like listing on the website because region is pretty easy to do. So if you can do region and theme,
Mhm.
then RCC can focus on training and development for the sort of the head, and then those heads can work together to work on more regional subgroups. That's my
Mhm.
thought.
That's helpful. Thanks, everybody. So we're hearing you, and these are great. This is really great advice, and I'm so grateful for you each giving your time towards this. And just want to share with you kind of like where we're at and what we're going to do with what we've harvested from this time today. We're gonna test out what we've heard, which is people need to be connected. That matches their lived realities. People are the pure affinity group seems to be important, maybe as a primary, but regional still secondary. That there can be some self leadership that could take place in this, and that RCC can sort of be the spark to sort of make this happen. Um, that folks can sort of manage their time and sort of figure out like how often they want to do this. Um, so Pam and I will synthesize what we've heard. We'll probably put something out in maybe the March newsletter that sort of highlights kind of what we're hearing so that everybody can sort of see what the 12 of us talked about at least today. And we'll probably very soon choose a few affinity or peer groups that we could pilot. So first time executive directors, Alexander, I think that'll be a really great one. So I'll definitely poke you for that one. Maybe Buddhist, I've heard that is a really strong one. So Pam, I might poke you for that one. And if any of you are like, this is a affinity group I really would love to be a part of, like Dan and I talked about, maybe there should be a European affinity group. So Dan, we could talk about Dan's in Croatia. So, send us a message, put it in the chat, whatever you think, it would be good. And we don't have to do it all at the beginning, but we definitely want to start, generating some momentum in this area. So I just want to say thank you for being here today. I'm putting in the chat just a few upcoming events and whatnot. Part of my role is to remind folks to consider having a membership with RCC. So if you don't already, or if your organization doesn't, there's a link there for you to go and explore that. I'd be happy to meet with you to talk more about memberships and what that looks like. And if you've been a membership for a while, soon you're going to be getting your renewal notice. So if you kind of signed up in the winter last year, you're going to start to get a notice to renew. We're really hoping people can consider maybe just bumping up a little bit from what they did last year, noting that, the benefit of the collaboration. We have 2 calls the first week of March, which are going to be great. One is Tea with Tatiana, recruitment and interviewing, finding the right fit for your organization. I think this is going to be a really good call. So many of us do interviewing as a big part of our work. So Tatiana will offer some really great skills in that area. 1 o'clock on Tuesday, March 3rd. And March 4th, I'm excited about this call, although I'm sad we have to have it, but it's about what's emerging in the North American context and how do we, this is building off of Peter's letter to, which is in the blog section of the website. And a lot of people have asked, like, can we please get together and talk about this? So we're going to have a 90-minute community call on sort of the state of the world of retreat. And Kirsten Vandergiesen Reitzma from Gilchrist and I are going to facilitate that call together. So we hope you'll come with an open heart to lament and celebrate, and kind of like we did at the beginning of COVID. So thank you so much for giving of your time today. I really appreciate it. I have learned a lot, and I think also been affirmed in kind of where we're going in this area. So you have 4 minutes extra to go back to your day with. So go take a breath of air outside before you dive into the next thing. Feel the cold or the sun or the warmth or whatever's happening. See you later, everybody.